Hello and welcome to another Prokraft video. Today we're going to look at installing and fitting a skeleton clock kit. The one we're going to do today is a 150mm kit. None of them are very difficult, but the 150mm is probably the trickier of the three, because as you might be able to see on the side, it needs a little recess for this bezel here. For the sizing of your piece of wood, the 150mm, which is this one, and 133, which comes in the same size box, you're going to need roughly this size piece of wood to work with. On the 103mm, again the box gives you an idea of the minimum size that you need. That's not the depth, that's just this area here is the minimum that you're going to need, and it obviously depends on how big a project that you want to do. Now normally I wouldn't bring a whole clock like this into the workshop. This has been in here a while because it's actually slightly damaged. It's got a slight crack on the back, so I'm using this opportunity to show you how to fit this particular model. And the next thing I'm going to do is hold the bezel, turn it anti-clockwise, remove the bezel, and the bezel is the piece that we're going to use with the sycamore that I've got the other side of the workshop to aid us fitting and installing the kit. The rest of it could stay inside out of the dust, and it's much better that way, because when you've got dust in it, it won't harm the clock. It's just the devil's own job to get rid of it. So without further ado, we're going to mount the piece of sycamore on a faceplate and start the turning process. So I've trimmed up the bit of sycamore, and on the top of it you might be able to see here there's a little bit of figuring. Now I'm going to see if I can retain that in the project. I think most of it's going to come out, but we'll see what happens when I trim the sycamore up. The other thing I've done, as you can see here, is remove the gold bezel from the skeleton clock. So we're going to use this to measure and make sure we get a really good fit in the piece here. So first of all, we'll don some safety equipment and we'll trim up this bit of wood. So we've trimmed up this piece, and we're now going to measure the diameter that we need to fit the bezel, mark on the piece here, and then cut out for the bezel, not going in too far, just to fit the bezel, because it's a slightly different diameter on the inside for the rest of the clock. The distance we need to fit the bezel is 145mm. Half of 145 is 72.5. And I've actually set this pair of compasses at 72. We can always trim a little bit more out, but we can't add it back in again. Just going to mark the centre, and that is the line that we're marking there that should be the cutout for the bezel. We'll see if that little bit of figuring in the wood remains there. I'm not convinced it will, but we'll have a try. The other thing that we need to do is to make sure that the bezel cutout we put in is at least 6.5mm. I think we'll make it 7mm. If it's a little bit over, it doesn't matter, as long as it will fit in the piece of wood easily. So we'll go ahead and cut this piece out here. As always, I'm not saying that this is the correct way of doing things, it's just our way of doing things, just to assist anyone that might be a little bit concerned about fitting one of these clocks, because they're not particularly cheap and you don't want to get it wrong. But at the end of the day, if the only piece you're bringing into the workshop is this bit, the rest of it's fairly safe, to be honest. So I've taken some of the centre out of the piece of wood, and it's starting to look a little bit like a bowl, which essentially is what it is. It's just going to be a bowl with an open back. The measurement that I need for the main clock part is 142mm. I've set the protractors at 71, actually slightly less than 71. I think they're about 69 to 70, so we'll go ahead and mark that rim there, and that is the inner rim that we need. So having taken the rough bit out of the middle, we can then double check that our bezel fits in the inner rim and covers the gap, which it does there, and we can start to see how the clock's going to look. We can also see the inner bit that I've cut there, and we can double check that measurement with the calipers to make sure it's correct. So now we've got the rough part of the clock body correct, we can think about shaping and finishing the front section here, adding any embellishments we want to, but because this is just a fitting guide, I'm not going to do too much. I'm going to roughly sand it down, and then we're going to turn around and finish the back off and take the back section out here as well. So we've got a homemade bowl sander, which is a project that we're currently working on to do a kit for that. That's a story for another day. We're just going to finish off the outside of this and then turn it around and hollow out the back and see what we finish up with. So we've got some large jaws, expanding jaws on here, and our clock part has been put back on the lathe, and we're now going to mark the centre and then mark for a diameter of about 140-142 mils. So we're going to meet on the other side, and then we're going to cut this piece out. What I'm now going to try and do, to save an awful lot of mess, is try and take this centre piece out in one piece instead of gradually working it all off, because we only need to meet up on this edge here, and then we can tidy up the inside and the back, and then we can get on with fitting the clock. Right, as you'll see, I've changed the jaws and I've now got them in contraction mode. I wasn't very happy about the stability with the expansion mode in there, so I've changed those, and we're now just going to finish off the inside and just tidy up the back section. So we've tidied up the rear rim, we've tidied up the inside. I'm just going to give this a rough sand, and then we're almost ready to turn around and fit the clock. Okay, so we've put a little bit of sealer on the inside and on the back, and a little bit of wax. This is the back. If we wanted to, we could turn the project around and do a little bit more work on the front if we wanted to do anything extra, but most of the work needs to be done while it's on the faceplate rather than on these, because it's far more secure on a faceplate than on these. But we're now ready to take this off, and we'll have a go at fitting the clock. So we've got our bits of clock back together. I'm doing this in the workshop, but if I was you, I would do this indoors away from the dust. But as I say, this clock has been knocking around for a little while, so just popping the glass back in the bezel, and then we'll take the clock, sit that on the back, and the bezel can now fit. I'll show you it does fit, but you might have to look at the rear just to see where the little, there we go, and it tightens up clockwise. We've got the rubber band on there. We'll take our frame, and then it should simply be a little matter of just twist and fit into the frame until it's in there nice and tight. It's a little bit tricky, but basically there we go, and that is one skeleton clock fitted into a very, very basic frame. But as I said, it's not a design lesson. This is more just how to fit the clock rather than anything else. And you can fiddle around with that, and obviously at the rear, so albeit this one is slightly broken, which is why it's in here, you've got access to the battery compartment and the time adjuster on the back as well. As you can see, this is very, very deep, this piece I've done here. I could have trimmed that right back, and it obviously needs something on the piece of wood to fix it, to make sure that we can mount it on something so it would stand as a carriage type clock on a mantelpiece, or equally the 150mm one is nearly large enough to have as a wall mounted clock. Just before we go, here's a little tip for you. I'm just going to take the clock out again, because I've talked a lot about measurements on clocks. Now, the thing that probably no one will tell you, but I will, is that if you make a cut that's fractionally too large, don't panic. You see the edge of the clock here is a solid colour. This band easily removes off there. You can put some tape around there, refit the band to get some extra diameter, and then you can refit the clock back in its case. So there we have a skeleton clock in its very simplest form. What I've done with this one is just smooth off the bottom there to give it a flat plate to stand on, and that now stands, and you can see the finished piece there. So I hope that's been useful for a few of you to know how relatively simple it is to turn a skeleton clock, and even with this simple, plain and relatively small frame, they still look quite an impressive project. So again, I hope that's been useful, and if you've got any questions, do let us know. We're more than happy to help out whenever we can, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.